It's safe to say that there weren't any mental health professionals back then providing therapeutic services for the slaves after they had been beaten or raped or anything like that. So as a result, many of these symptoms were left untreated and passed down from one generation to the next. Because like I initially said, these were some of the behaviors that were crucial to survival back then, but now throughout the generations and the generational transmission has become these maladaptive behaviors. And so PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, it's the result of that multi-generational transmission. And so these are behaviors that, as today, African Americans still exhibit as a result of that multi-generational transmission. And so PTSS is a syndrome, and a syndrome means that it's a pattern of behaviors that occur during specific circumstances. Slides backwards. So maladaptive behaviors. So maladaptive behaviors are associated with intergenerational adaptations associated with the past trauma, the past horrors of slavery, and then continued oppression. Okay, and so I want to give you guys some examples of current day maladaptive behaviors that African Americans may exude that has a direct historical link back to slavery. So for example, I don't know if you've maybe witnessed this yourself, or maybe heard of it, seen it in the media or something like that. Sometimes African American parents have difficulty acknowledging the positive qualities in their children. You may hear parents talk about their kids, oh, he's not this, he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that. When you yourself, either as a clinician or as an individual, you may see a lot of positive qualities in that child. And one of the things during slavery is when the slave master came around and he noticed that, little Bobby was, really working well in the fields, doing really good work, growing nice, big, and strong. That mother knew in her head, oh no, little Bobby might be sold to another slave master. And so in order to protect and preserve the family unit, that mother is going to say, oh no, Bobby didn't do this, or he's not that big, he's not that strong, he's sorry. And that was a way to keep her son with her, to talk as badly as she could about her son to ensure that he didn't get sold off to slavery, because then she knew she would have never seen him again. And so today, due to that transmission, multi-generational transmission, a lot of African American parents, they still do that today. And as a result, it's causing children who have that low self-esteem, or they don't really believe in themselves. Because how could they believe in themselves if their parents, the people who birthed them and brought them into this world, are saying negative things about them? So this is another way where this is perpetuated through the generations. Another thing is, during slavery, when slavery ended, during the Reconstruction era, it was very unsafe for individuals to wander off, children to wander off by themselves, because it can result in their death or them being seriously injured, because it wasn't safe for them out there. People were still angry that slavery was over and they wanted to kind of lash out and things like that. So today, this has created some of this hypervigilance of African American parents needing to know where their kids are at all times, because back then the world wasn't safe for them. And so today that same thought is true. The world isn't safe for my son or daughter, so I need to know where they are. And so sometimes you may be at the grocery store or in the bank, and you may see little kids wandering around in close proximity to their parents, but the black kid's right here because she needs to know where her child is. The last example I want to give you is sometimes within the African American community, we are threatened by other people's success within our own community. During the era of slavery, there was a separation of slaves. So you have the house slave and the field slave, the light slave and the black slave. And slave masters knew this and kind of perpetuated that separateness between these two groups of people by either giving access or denying access to certain things. So if you were a field slave, that means you were in the field working long hours under the hot sun, sweating, very little food or water that would give you the strength that you needed to really fill those tasks and duties. On the other hand, if you were a house slave, you had better food, You were allowed to take more showers because you were in direct contact with the family, and you had to be cleaner. And you had better working hours, better food, better chance of having access to education through people in the house. Okay? And so they knew this. And so because of this, there was kind of like this hierarchy where, oh, you know, the house slaves think they're better than the field slaves. Or another example is black slaves and then the mulatto slaves. So we know that slave masters raped their slaves. And as a result, they had children that were multiracial. So black and white, which back then they called mulatto. And so the mulatto slaves, they had a lot of opportunities as well because they were a direct link to the slave master. So sometimes maybe they had different houses, they had better food, better clothing, better chance of getting education as well. Also, with that comes the features that, you know, a multiracial person will have. So, you know, you have lighter skin, which is going to be kind of similar to that European value of light skin. Your hair texture is going to be different. You know, African slaves had that thick, kinky type hair. If you were a mulatto slave, you know, your hair had a looser texture to it. It had some curl to it. And these were very associated with the European standards of beauty. And so that was very prized. So as today, the same thing still occurs. There's a lot of separation between the black community in terms of colorism, you know, being on that spectrum from light to dark. Today, it's still prized to be that light skin, you know, to have that curly hair, to have that wavy hair, that good hair, as people talk about it, that good hair. And it's so huge that that comedian, I can't remember his name right now, but he did a whole movie on good hair because it's such a huge issue. Chris Rock, there you go. He did that whole movie about good hair because it's still a problem today. It's still a huge problem today. And so as a result, you may hear people say, oh, you know, she's going to lose that house. You know, she don't have the money to do that house, or he only got the job because he knows the boss and things like that. So this creates this tension within our own community because of things that happened all the way back then. So what you're probably thinking, okay, that's all great, Brandi, but what does this mean for me as a counselor? Okay, so I want to talk about some implications for counselors. Now, this wouldn't be a presentation or a project that Dr. Rahim has helped me on if I don't include the invitation for repair. So anyone who has had his classes knows how important the invitation for repair is for him. And what the invitation for repair is, it's just your first opportunity as a counselor to acknowledge the similarities and differences between you and your client. So I'll give you a little demo of the invitation for repair. Can I have your name?
Karen.
Karen? And what do you identify as racially? Hispanic? Okay. Well, Karen, I just want to thank you for coming in today. Before we get started, I just kind of want to acknowledge some of the similarities and differences that we have, okay? So we're both female, however, I identify as African American, and I see that you identify as Hispanic. And so for any time during, you know, our therapeutic relationship, if something comes up in terms of race or ethnicity that I'm not getting, or that you want me to understand, if you could just let me know, because I want to try my best to really understand you as an individual, including your racial background, okay? So that's it. So that's just acknowledging the similarities and differences between you and your client. The next thing is just the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. A lot of times as counselors, mental health professionals, we miss the opportunity to talk about race because it's uncomfortable. Society has told us that that is something taboo and that that's what you don't talk about. Instead, you say, oh, I'm colorblind and I don't see race, you know, we're equal and things like that. But in reality, as a person, my racial background is a part of who I am. And so denying that part is denying a part of me as well. And before I go into that, I just want to say one thing. Sometimes clients, they may never bring up race in the therapeutic alliance. They may never bring it up. However, it's still important to acknowledge, because not bringing it up can kind of hinder the therapeutic relationship. Okay? So like I was saying, sometimes we feel uncomfortable. You know, race is touchy, you know, you don't want to talk about it. Sometimes it's the fear of saying the wrong thing. a lot of times we don't know how to address our clients. Do they want to be called black, or do they want to be called African American? Or I don't know, so I'm just not going to say anything. And what I did with her is I asked her, what does she identify as? I didn't want to assume, physically I may assume that, oh, she may be Hispanic, but she may prefer to be called Mexican American. Same for us. A lot of times some people don't like to be called black. They prefer African American. So instead of you saying the wrong thing or fearing saying the wrong thing, give it to the client and allow them to tell you what they would like to be referred as. And other times we just may not know when race is relevant, in the therapeutic relationship. So we're just going to say, oh, I'm just not going to talk about it because it might be relevant or it might not. But I would err on the side of caution just to bring it up. For me personally, if you acknowledge the fact that I'm black, I'm not going to be upset because I know that I'm black. I get it, so don't be afraid. I didn't wake up one day and was like, oh my gosh, I'm black, what happened? So I knew this. So in acknowledging it, you're not hurting my feelings. I prefer you to acknowledge it because then I know you see me as a whole individual and not just part. So what happens if I don't talk about race? Not talking about your racial similarities and differences may communicate to the client that you're uncomfortable having these conversations. Or better yet, it may convey that it's not important to you. Both of which can hurt the therapeutic alliance between you and your client. The great thing is, as counselors, we're trained to be skilled in listening, perspective taking, and developing empathy for our clients. And so instead of shying away from talking about race and things like that, we should go towards it and use it as an opportunity to have those difficult conversations and also to just kind of grow professionally and personally as well. Next thing is know your biases. We all have biases. There's no shame in acknowledging that. I think the problem occurs when we don't acknowledge the fact that we have biases. Because once you acknowledge the fact that you have biases, then you can try to find out, first of all, where did that bias come from, and whether it's a bias that you like to keep or try to diminish. Okay? And another important thing about knowing your biases is knowing the biased language that you may be communicating within the therapeutic relationship. So once again, this wouldn't be a presentation and a project that Dr. Rahim has helped you with if I don't talk about racial microaggressions. And so I know many of you were in his presentation before, you already heard about this, but let me just reiterate. So racial microaggressions are these verbal, behavior, and environmental indignities, which are either intentional or unintentional, that communicate derogative or negative racial language or behavior towards an individual or a group of people. And racial microaggressions, there's 3 types. So you have the micro-assault, micro-insult, and micro-invalidation. So micro-assault, these are verbal or non-verbal attacks meant to hurt the intended target. So these are intentional. And a lot of times, the perpetrators that do these type of microaggressions, they'll only do it in an arena where they feel safe, or when they lose their temper and kind of go off. So a safe environment is being with your same group of friends, maybe telling black jokes to one another and laughing at the black jokes. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Or getting very angry at an African American and calling them the N-word. Because this is deliberate. You're intentionally trying to hurt them. Hit them under the belt. So next is the micro-insult. So this is communication that conveys rudeness or sensitivity towards a person's racial identity. And a lot of times these are very subtle. And so when the person does it, usually they're unaware of the fact that they did it. However, the victim, they're left thinking, did they really just say what I think they said? So then they're kind of ruminating and thinking about this thing like, man, well maybe I got it wrong, or maybe that I didn't. So this causes distress for the individual because they're so subtle. The person has to question themselves over and over again to really make sure that they heard what they thought they heard. And lastly, micro-invalidations. So this is communication that excludes or negates the thoughts and feelings of a person of color. So say, for example, that you have an African American male client, and he's talking about police brutality because that's something that's very relevant to him in his life. But you're saying like, oh no, police, they treat everyone equal. They're meant to save people. They're here to protect us. You know, what you're feeling? No, you're wrong. You're wrong. Micro-invalidation right there. You're invalidating his thoughts. Because as counselors, we're not so much concerned about our things. We're more concerned about what the client feels and the client's perspective. And so invalidating his thoughts and feelings about police brutality, that can definitely hinder the therapeutic relationship. So it's just really important just to be aware of this type of language. Because we do it every day. Because like I said, racial microaggressions, they're intentional and they're also unintentional. So we can do it and not even realize it. So the next thing is counselor cultural competency. And what this is just as counselors, as mental health professionals, just kind of understanding what it means to be African American. And that just includes some of the beliefs and values and characteristics of the whole community. And failing to do so could cause a greater gap between you and your client even before therapy starts. So if an African American client sits in your chair right across from you, and you have no context of what it means to be African American and some of the good things and some of the bad things and some of the struggles that an African American individual might have had, you're already starting at a disadvantage. It's also very important to have an idea of yourself and your own identity. You need to know who you are as a counselor in order to be culturally competent. And then not only knowing yourself as a counselor, but knowing how you yourself either are similar or different from the African American client. Okay, so spirituality. Spirituality is huge within the African American community. And spirituality is the means in which individuals get in touch with their souls. And so that's comprised of the physical, the psychological, and the immaterial, or better yet, known as the mind, body, and soul. Okay? So African American spirituality, it really began verbally. During the era of slavery, they sung what was called sorrow songs, or Negro spirituals. And these are things that they would sing while they're working in the fields, kind of trying to give them that strength to carry on through all this trauma and hurt. And so they highlighted the strong characteristics of God and also their longing for freedom and justice. So this was all comprised in these songs that they sung. And today this still exists, but usually in the form of like gospel music or even spoken word, things like that. Because spirituality is so important, you can't just assess an African American client in terms of like the cognitive and behavioral. You need to take into account their spiritual aspect as well. And a lot of times people get confused with like spirituality and religion, things like that. Some people it may be similar or may even be the same, but just like you never want to assume what a client wants to be identified as, you never want to assume with the client as well. So it's really important to have these conversations because spirituality can be used as a means of strength in the therapeutic alliance. So I would encourage you guys to kind of do like a spirituality assessment. And this goes beyond asking like, oh, what is your religious affiliation? What church do you go to? Do you pray? And things like that. That goes beyond that. And so you would ask questions as, do you have spiritual practices that are helpful to you in times of need? Trying to see what they use as coping skills and mechanisms when they're in trouble. You can also ask, how would you like these beliefs and practices incorporated into the therapeutic setting? Because we want to use things that they already are comfortable with. That way we can build upon. We want to use the existing skills that they already have. And then also some of these spirituality practices, they can also be incorporated into a treatment plan as well. And so lastly, I want to talk about the racial identity development of a client. You may say, Brandi, this information is great, but I've had African American clients and none of this stuff ever came up. None of this slavery stuff or this oppression stuff or the racial microaggressions, it never came up. And it could be because depending on where they are within the model of racial identity development. So Dr. Ahim talked about it briefly, talked about William Cross and his racial identity development model for African Americans. And like he said before, it's not linear, meaning they'll go through this step, through this step, through this step. It's kind of circular. sometimes people go in and out of a stage, they can skip a stage, you know, there's no saying that you have to go, you know, like that. So the first one is the pre-encounter. And this is when African Americans, they believe the values of the dominant white culture and the negative black stereotypes. All black people are poor, they don't have moms and dads, you know, they're lazy and things like that. Sometimes as African Americans, we hear people within our own community saying these same characteristics, saying these same stereotypes about one another. And then you have the encounter stage. And the encounter stage is basically what it is. It's an encounter. It's their initial encounter that kind of lets them know, like, okay, racism does exist. Something had to happen. And so for me, my encounter stage, it came when I was young. I would say I was probably about 10 years old. And the year before, I had lived in LA. I grew up in LA. And so my teachers were black, my classmates were black, everyone I knew was black. And so then my mom and I, my brother, we moved to Palmdale. Are you guys familiar with Palmdale, the Antelope Valley? Yeah. It's nothing special. You guys aren't missing anything. So when I moved back to Palmdale in 1996, there were not a lot of black people. I used to say we were endangered species because I did not see other people that looked like me. And for a 10-year-old Brandi, that was something that was very shocking. Very, very shocking. I want to say I probably had 5 other black students in the entire school, and that was a K through 6 school. And so for me, my encounter period came when I was on the soccer team. My mom wanted me to get involved in school stuff, and so she said, Brandi, you're going to play soccer. I didn't know anything about soccer, but I was going to play. I just knew to run and kick the ball. So I was like, I could do that. And so there was a girl on the soccer team. She was a goalie, and she came up to me and she said, Brandi, have you ever been in a fire? I was like, what do you mean? I was like, no. I had thought that she saw a little girl that looked like me whose house had burned down. I was like, no, I've never been in a fire. And so that kept on playing through my mind over and over again, like, man, what does she mean by that? And then later that night, it hit me. She thought I was in the fire because I was dark. I had brown skin. She thought that I was burnt in the fire. And so for me, it shocked me because, like I said, growing up, everyone looked like me, you know, and having different individuals and stuff like that kind of look at me differently or treat me kind of weird. That was my encounter stage of race, that everyone's not comfortable with the fact that I'm dark. I have brown skin. So that was my encounter stage at 10 years old. Immersion, or immersion, is the desire to surround yourself with physical symptoms of one's own race. And so in the black community, these may be people that are very Afrocentric. You know, maybe having the African prints, or trying to go back to Ghana and visit where their ancestors came from. These are people that are very in tune and in touch, wanting to find that missing link in order for them to be whole again. Internalization, that's the final stage. And what that is that they maintain that connection and pride in their own culture and background, but they're also able to establish meaningful relationships with people that are from other backgrounds. Because one of the things I forgot to mention in the immersion stage is while they're engulfing themselves into their own culture, they're kind of negating the culture and experiences and the value of everyone else's culture. So theirs is the dominant. Theirs is the most important. But in the internalization stage, they're able to have that balance. I view my background and culture as worthy and valuable, and I also do the same with yours. So this is kind of like this equality type of thing. And so these are things just to keep in mind with when you're dealing with a client. A client who is in the pre-encounter stage may not be talking about slavery. They may have no concept. I mean, of course they know it exists, but it doesn't have any relevance in their lives. Because like I said, many people ask, how can something so long ago still impact individuals today? So that's the prime example of someone who may be in the encounter stage. And so these are just some brief things that you as counselors can do to kind of better serve those African American clients. And as you can see, in the things that I said, they're not like too out of the box. They're not asking you to wear dashikis or, you know, things like that. So these are very doable things that you guys can do. And really, that really concludes my presentation. I'm at the end right now. But if you guys have any questions that are easy for me to answer, that's the trick, easy, because, you know, I'm on the spot. right here, and it's hard to think really fast, and stuff, and I don't want you sweating or anything like that, but if you guys have any questions, also you guys have these evaluations in front of you, and I would really appreciate if you can give honest feedback. This is my very first time presenting this information, and I want to know ways that I can improve it and do better, because it's my hope to kind of do these presentations more often, because this is something that I'm so passionate about. And any honest feedback would be awesome. You guys don't have to write your name on it, so you can be honest.
Hi, Brandi.
Hey, Melissa.
Can you repeat what the archetypes for the 3 black women were? And did you come up with those, or did you get them from some other literature?
No, these are very known archetypes within the Black community. So it's the mammy, that's the first one. So that's that large, the overweight, big-breasted woman who is very maternal and non-threatening. That's the mammy. And then you have the sapphire. That's the sassy girl. That's the one that's associated. A lot of times you see these on TV too. You'll see the Black girl, you know, with her neck like this and snapping her finger and things like that. So that's the sapphire. And then you have the Jezebel, which would be, in modern words, basically a whole type character. And a lot of times, if you look very closely in movies and TV, a lot of these stereotypes, these archetypes are well known in media. And we can argue that the reason that why they're well known is because it's a part of the collective unconscious, that knowledge that we all have, and that these individuals who are making these films and TV shows are just choosing to use that from a thought process that we all have.
You have similar stereotypes for Black men as far as carried over from generations?
They do. I know one of them is like the Uncle Tom, and that was during slavery, and the Uncle Tom was just like, yes sir, the yes master type, kind of docile and very quiet, not really sticking out too. So yeah, we do have archetypes as well for African American men. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank you guys so much. It wasn't as bad. I was so nervous.
Excellent job, Brandi. You did an excellent job. Good information and well conveyed.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay.
And I would not have thought that was your first presentation.
No, I know.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I prepared about 12 questions for you, but I'll hold off on
Thank you.
that.
All right. Thanks for coming.
No problem.
Yeah, I can read it
I was
out.
going to comment.
They were at the door.
I just walked in and
Good job.
Oh my God, we had to do
Oh, do I have
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's awesome.
Sorry, could you sign this one?
Oh, sure.
Anywhere on there.
it's okay. It's okay. It's a different one that you signed in.
Thank you.
Your passion, your energy is awesome.
That's why it's
So good.
Okay.
I'm just reading that one right now.
Thanks for asking.
I can just tell like when you look around like,
Oh my God, what you want, girl?
I wanted to like write on the board or something, because I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah, no, I can give you a little thing about it.
I put that on your application. I didn't see her. I hadn't noticed.
excellent.
Hey, you. That's how's it going?
Saturday.
Oh, I gotta go.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about it, it's a far back thought, I just wanna.
Yeah, you got time.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, it's like, yeah. The way you put it all together, like that? No, really. Why can't I think of that?
But I don't think it
Yeah, especially the way you it looks like, okay, you're controlling, overpowering, overbearing mom. And it's like, no, I can understand that now. It was actually better than yours.
Nothing better.
That's true. That's true.
It was good. That was good. She was that.
Oh, funny we get to see.
Yeah. Only got this one.
No, let's leave that part out.
Yeah, I mean, I need to bring it back or anything like that. I need to bring it out.
Okay, is Miguel in it with you as well, or?
I'm not worried.
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
Sorry, I'm like,
Good.
wait,
Teach
he came
us
in.
all.
Yeah.
I ain't even worried about that.
Take credit for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was awesome.
So, like, happy for Dr. Reed, so, part of my course.
Good to know.
Yeah. Take care.
You too. Yeah, you too. I was like, no, I'm not ready yet.
I'm gonna give you my too.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Actually, I wanted to, post-traumatic syndrome.
Good job, Brandi.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. Are you aware of Dr. Dupree?
Oh my God, I love her.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh. When I read her book, it just like a light bulb coming off for me, and I just felt so old.
How you doing, sir?
Knowing.
I felt validated.
Yes.
That's why you
very
come back
much.
here 4 hours.